Well, let's continue. As we discussed earlier in the lecture, multiple factors are giving rise to globalization. Here's some evidence that globalization is accelerating. Globalization of corporate operations has experienced strong growth since the 1970s. The trade to GDP ratio in the United States has grown from 11.1% in 1970 to 28% in 2006. Global offshoring revenues continue to show strong growth, increasing from $119 billion in 2000 to $300 billion in 2008. And this is redeploying operations overseas. U.S. corporations committed $60 billion in direct foreign investment for new manufacturing in 2006. This is redeploying infrastructure overseas. Eli Lilly Pharmaceutical conducts over 50% of its clinical trials outside of the United States. The business world is undergoing a fundamental transformation from mass production, where human labor was the principal source of value, to a new era where the principal component of value creation, productivity, and economic growth is knowledge. Intangible assets, and that includes patents, know-how, and a skilled workforce, now account for over half the total market capitalization of public U.S. corporations. The financial incentive for globalizing operations has become compelling. McKinsey Consulting reports that for every $1 of U.S. business offshored, $1.46 in new wealth is generated, with $1.13 of that coming back to the United States. Additionally, globalization is driven by a diffusion of technical knowledge. It's driven by emerging market growth, global economic liberalization, worldwide convergence of business culture, and corporate focus on Porter's generic strategies. Currently, McKinsey has divided work in organizations into three categories: transformational, and that's the extraction of raw materials and its conversion to output; transactional, and these are interactions that can be easily scripted or automated; and tacit, and these are complex interactions requiring a high level of judgment. Tacit jobs are growing 2.5 times the rate of transactional jobs. There are two implications to this trend. One, intellectual capital has become a key source of value, and two, knowledge workers, those who generate intellectual capital, are critical to the organization. Porter's generic strategies stress either the cheapest cost or the need to establish product differentiation. Technology-enhanced productivity and the industrialization of emerging countries has created a worldwide supply that exceeds demand in existing markets. As we mentioned earlier, China alone can meet the entire world's demand for goods and services. So firms cannot survive in a low-cost world of overcapacity without strategies based on innovation, because existing markets are saturated with supply, and firms have to innovate their products and services so that they have features that differentiate them from the low-cost, very competitive manufacturing organizations in the emerging world. Adaptability is synonymous with the survival of the organization. More than ever, organizations face an uncertain environment and relentless change. Failure to understand the environment or inappropriate response to change has pulled powerful organizations through a vortex, and after which, if they survived at all, their look and capacity was very much different than before. By tapping into distributed knowledge, organizations can not only endure, but they can obtain competitive insights into the environment. An essential form of knowledge is from sense-making of the complex environment to obtain situational awareness. Deregulation in the 1980s increased environmental complexity. Coincidentally, in the 1980s, organizations began projects to accomplish strategic goals. Before that, projects in the 1960s through the late 1970s were usually restricted to a functional area and were managed by a functional manager. Organizational coordination across functional disciplines was not an issue, and such projects did not require formal intra-organizational communications. In contrast, today, projects are cross-cutting. They do cut across organizational boundaries, and so you have to establish intra-organizational communication protocols. This project complexity began in the late 1970s and skyrocketed in the 1980s. Average project value remained relatively flat, around 17 million from 1960 through 1976. In 1978, average project value started a parabolic rise to reach 80 million by 1984. Another factor increasing complexity was that product life cycles began to shorten. In the 1980s, the time to market pressures and shortened product life cycles had a profound effect on organizations. Cross-functional teams were needed to effectively deal with the new circumstances. The governing principle that explains why cross-functional teams respond more quickly and effectively to complexity is the law of requisite variety. As we discussed earlier, this law states that the variety in a system must be at least as great as the environmental variety that it is attempting to influence. And Ashby developed this concept, and he published it in his 1956 book, Cybernetics, which was kind of the precursor to the introduction to computer science that is variously called Introduction to Problem Solving and Computer Programming, or Elementary Algorithmic Analysis and Computer Programming. But the cybernetics courses in the 50s were precursors to that. And Ashby, in his book Cybernetics, gives an example in photography to illustrate the law of requisite variety. A photographer who has 5 subjects, each at a different distance from the camera, is going to need a camera that has 5 distinct settings to capture all the subjects with a uniform density and clarity. If the camera has fewer than 5 settings, it lacks the requisite variety and will not register with sufficient detail to depict all of the scenes with accuracy. So, central hierarchies may not have certain types of skills or knowledge. Moreover, knowledge available to central planning committee members is aggregated and propositional. The central management problems for an organization is the utilization of knowledge which is not and cannot be known by a centralized hierarchy, even if they are the best and brightest. Furthermore, no central planning hierarchy can competently stipulate beforehand the type of useful knowledge that will be relevant and when and where it is going to be located. Leaders cannot be overseeing minds, and neither can a centralized hierarchy. So where do global teams fit into our organization of the future? Well, Vlar and Rachiva contend that virtual teams are emerging as the new organizational form in multinational corporations because they leverage distributed knowledge. Leadership and management processes must support knowledge discovery, creation, or sharing. Knowledge creation and knowledge sharing are actually more difficult with globally distributed assets because of the time difference, the lack of face-to-face interaction, and cultural issues. However, concurrent with the need to tap this distributed knowledge, new information technologies provide the infrastructure for a new paradigm of work that can be conducted anywhere, anytime, and by any appropriate people, because they help overcome or mitigate the time differences, the lack of face-to-face interaction. And they can also help with cultural issues. Global teams offer both challenges and opportunities to leverage distributed knowledge in order to better the organization. For virtual teams in general, but especially global virtual teams, to discover, create, and share relevant knowledge requires people who are motivated to participate on the team and who are willing to shoulder the additional burdens created by global and virtual team working. Trust is an important element in all business activity, but it is essential for global and virtual teams. So is all lost for virtual teams? Given that we have these obstacles that are barriers to tapping into that distributed knowledge? Well, in this course, we'll investigate leadership principles, communication principles, cultural principles, and technology principles that help us mitigate the problems that virtual teams face. We will also study the reasonable and adaptable and determined qualities that are needed for people who will be on virtual teams. Some of the major challenges impeding collaboration by global virtual teams derive from cultural misunderstandings, language barriers, and the limitations of information and communication technologies. In addition, impediments to knowledge creation and sharing are a lack of trust, no clear strategic or mission direction, and perfunctory relationships. Without trust, teammates are reluctant to share, to take risk, raise questions. Strategic direction is needed for clear understandings of roles and responsibilities to align members and avoid duplication of work or working at cross purposes. Some personal characteristics of candidates for virtual global teams that will help mitigate these issues include the ability to listen with an open mind and those who extend trust until it is violated, as opposed to those who require someone to earn their trust. Another important characteristic is skill in resolving conflicts productively. Another one is to be supportive and sharing when dealing with the team instead of being autocratic. We'll go into much more detail about this in our leadership and team building lectures coming up. The U.S. Army realizes the need to tap into distributed knowledge, and we'll use them in several case studies this semester. I'm going to jump to a link with them, and we'll take a look at how they organize their knowledge management office. And you can see they've got virtual communities worldwide, and they include team leads that are networked together, warfighter and professional forums that are virtual communities that provide expertise in certain areas, and then a Web 2.0 collaborative and content environment. And we're going to have 3 lectures on technologies, 1 on general principles, and then 2 more on actual tool sets. And we'll get some hands-on with those tool sets. Of course, we're using one now, which is Blackboard. But the Army really recognizes the need for distributed global virtual teams. Okay, so before we conclude this evening, let's consider a case study and consider the opposing argument about global virtual teams and distributed management. We'll go ahead and take another break, and then we'll start the Vaisala Instruments case study. This is a Finnish instrument maker with worldwide sales. It sells products with complex configuration options to better meet customer needs. The worldwide sales force are locals from the countries that represent the Vaisala market. The sales team send knowledge of the local market conditions, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats back to Finland, and they get assistance from the products and the R&D organizations that are located in Finland. A knowledge problem developed as the company grew, and that is that the R&D in Finland was not getting timely and useful information or knowledge about local markets and potential new products. And by the same token, the worldwide sales teams did not get help in initially configuring products nor in helping customers resolve bugs on release products. So we'll come back and take a look at the Vaisala Instruments case study in 5 minutes.